The sea erupts in violent bursts of water, towering columns rising 70 feet into the air as Japanese 14-inch shells crash around the small American destroyer. On the bridge of the USS KIDD, Commander Alan Roby grips the railing, his knuckles white against the steel, as another near miss sends vibrations through the hull. It's April 7, 1945, just off the coast of Okinawa, and what he's about to do violates every naval tactical doctrine in the book. "Hard to starboard," he orders, his voice eerily calm against the backdrop of chaos. "All ahead flank." The helmsman hesitates for just a fraction of a second, eyes widening. "Sir, that's heading straight for them." "You heard me, sailor. Hard to starboard. All ahead flank." Through the smoke-streaked windows of the bridge, the massive silhouettes of 2 Japanese battleships loom on the horizon, their guns already trained on the American transports carrying thousands of Marines. Between those behemoths and the vulnerable transport stands only the USS KIDD, a Fletcher-class destroyer displacing barely 2,000 tons against enemy ships 20 times her size. As the KIDD's engines roar to full power, pushing the slim warship to 35 knots, the radio crackles with the voice of the task force commander. "Kidd, what in God's name are you doing? Maintain screen position. That's an order." Commander Roby reaches for the radio handset, then hesitates before setting it back down without responding. His eyes narrow as he stares at the approaching battleships, his lips pressed into a thin line of determination. "Prepare all torpedo tubes. Set depth at 12 feet. The men on the bridge exchange glances of disbelief and fear, but they follow their commander's orders. No one in the destroyer Squadron 24 knew that one man's defiance that morning would rewrite naval warfare tactics and save thousands of American lives in the coming hours. Alan Roby never planned on becoming a naval officer, let alone one who would one day make a decision that defied conventional wisdom and his superiors' direct orders. Born on July 12, 1911, in Rockport, Massachusetts, he grew up in a weathered clapboard house overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. His father, a commercial fisherman who worked the dangerous Grand Banks, had instilled in him a deep respect for the sea's power and unpredictability. "The ocean doesn't care about your plans," his father would tell him, calloused hands working nets on their small dock. "It only respects those who understand its nature and can adapt." Young Alan spent his childhood on boats, learning to read the weather, navigate by stars, and understand the subtle language of wind and current. Unlike the privileged backgrounds of many naval officers of the era, Roby's education came from practical experience rather than prestigious academies. He attended the local high school, where teachers noted his exceptional aptitude for mathematics and natural sciences. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, the Roby family's modest fishing business struggled like countless others across America. Alan, just 18 and recently graduated, took odd jobs around the harbor to help support his parents and 3 younger siblings. He might have continued this way, eventually inheriting his father's fishing boat, had fate not intervened in the form of a recruiting officer who visited Rockport in 1932. The Navy offered stability, a paycheck, and adventure. Alan enlisted as an ordinary seaman, expecting nothing more than a few years of service before returning to civilian life. His aptitude tests, however, revealed uncommon intelligence and problem-solving skills. After basic training, he was recommended for the Naval Academy's Special Commissioning Program for enlisted personnel with exceptional potential. His fellow officer candidates, many from wealthy families with generations of naval tradition, initially viewed the fisherman's son with skepticism. During tactical exercises, Roby often questioned established doctrine, earning him reprimands from instructors, but also a reputation for unconventional thinking. "Naval battles aren't chess matches played according to gentlemen's rules," he once argued in a strategy class, drawing disapproving glares. They're fluid, chaotic situations where the unexpected move might be the winning one. Despite his unorthodox views, or perhaps because of them, Roby graduated near the top of his class in 1937. His first assignment was as a junior officer aboard the destroyer USS Farragut. where he quickly earned respect for his natural seamanship and ability to anticipate problems before they developed. When Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Lieutenant Roby was serving as navigation officer aboard the destroyer USS Win. In the chaos following the surprise attack, with most of the senior officers ashore, Roby and a skeleton crew managed to get the Win underway, one of the few American ships to make it out of the harbor during the attack. This early demonstration of initiative under extreme pressure accelerated his career. By 1943, he had been promoted to lieutenant commander and given executive officer duties aboard the newly commissioned USS KIDD, named for Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd, who had been killed at Pearl Harbor. Sailors who served under Roby during this period described him as demanding but fair, with an uncanny ability to predict enemy movements. He thought differently than other officers, recalled Seaman Thomas Whitfield years later. While they were studying the tactical manual, Commander Roby was studying the enemy, how they thought, how they moved, what they valued. He'd run drills nobody else thought of, preparing us for scenarios that weren't in any playbook. By early 1945, Roby had been given command of the KIDD. The promotion came with a reputation. Some at Naval Command viewed him as brilliant but unpredictable, a wild card in the regimented world of naval operations. His immediate superior, Commodore James Harrington, once remarked, "Roby's the kind of officer who makes you nervous until the shooting starts. Then you thank God he's on your side." As the KIDD prepared to join the massive naval armada supporting the invasion of Okinawa, Roby gathered his officers in the wardroom for a frank discussion. "Gentlemen, we're heading into what might be the Navy's toughest fight yet. The Japanese know they're defending their home waters now. They'll throw everything they have at us, including tactics we haven't seen before. I expect each of you to know your job perfectly, but also to think beyond it." He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between life and annihilation for thousands of American sailors and Marines. By April 1945, the Pacific War had entered its final, most desperate phase. American forces had fought their way across the vast ocean in a series of increasingly bloody island campaigns. Now they stood poised to launch what many military planners viewed as the prelude to an invasion of Japan itself, Operation Iceberg, the assault on Okinawa. Located just 340 miles from the Japanese home islands, Okinawa represented the last major obstacle before an invasion of Japan proper. American military planners viewed it as essential territory. Its capture would provide airfields and naval bases from which to stage the final assault on Japan. For the Japanese High Command, Okinawa was quite literally the front doorstep of their homeland, and they were prepared to defend it with unprecedented ferocity. The scale of Operation Iceberg was staggering. The United States assembled the largest amphibious force in the Pacific War, 1,457 ships carrying nearly 200,000 combat troops. The initial landings began on April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday. While the Marine and Army divisions encountered surprisingly light resistance on the beaches, American commanders remained suspicious. Intelligence reports indicated that Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had withdrawn his 100,000 Japanese defenders into heavily fortified positions in the southern part of the island, preparing for a prolonged defensive battle of attrition. What American planners hadn't fully anticipated, however, was the Japanese Navy's desperate strategy. Unable to match American naval power in a conventional battle, the Imperial Japanese Navy had developed a terrifying new approach, Operation Ten-Go, essentially a massive coordinated kamikaze attack involving hundreds of aircraft and surface ships on suicide missions. The centerpiece of this operation was the super battleship Yamato, the largest, most powerful battleship ever constructed, displacing 72,000 tons and armed with 18-inch guns that could hurl shells weighing as much as a small automobile over 20 miles. Alongside the Yamato sailed the battleship Musashi and a screen of escorts, including heavy cruisers and destroyers. Their mission was brutally simple: sail directly into the American transport fleet off Okinawa, inflict maximum damage using their massive guns, then beach themselves and use their remaining weapons as shore batteries until destroyed. It was, in essence, a surface ship kamikaze mission. The ships carried only enough fuel for a one-way journey. American intelligence had detected the sortie of the Japanese task force from the inland sea, but had misjudged its timing. Most of the powerful American fast carrier groups that could have intercepted the Japanese ships were operating hundreds of miles north, leaving the transport fleet protected primarily by destroyer screens and escort carriers. Destroyer Squadron 24, including the USS KIDD, had been assigned to radar picket duty approximately 50 miles northwest of the Okinawa beachhead. Their mission was to provide early warning of incoming air attacks. On the morning of April 7th, however, radar technician Second Class Edwin Malley detected something unexpected on the KIDD's newly installed SG surface radar. Contact bearing 035, range 22,000 yards, Malley reported. Multiple large surface vessels approaching at 20 knots. Commander Roby, who had been catching a rare 2 hours of sleep in his sea cabin adjacent to the bridge, was immediately alerted. Within minutes, he was examining the radar contacts personally. "Those are capital ships," he muttered, recognizing the distinctive radar signature of very large surface vessels. Battleships, at least 2 of them. Lieutenant Junior Grade Robert Markham, the officer of the deck, swallowed nervously. "Sir, if those are Japanese battleships, they're way too big for us to engage. Squadron orders are to report and shadow only." Roby nodded absently, his mind already calculating distances, angles, and timing. The Japanese ships were on a direct course for the transport area where dozens of American troopships and landing craft were clustered, many of them stationary as they unloaded men and supplies. If those battleships got within range, thousands of American sailors and Marines would die. "Radio, send emergency contact report to Squadron and Fleet Command." "Authenticate with today's code," Roby ordered. Then, turning to the helmsman, "Come to course 035, all ahead full." "Sir?" The helmsman looked confused. "That puts us on an intercept course with the enemy." "I'm aware of that, sailor." "Execute the order." As the KIDD's engines ramped up to full power, pushing the destroyer toward the approaching Japanese force, the radio room reported, "Sir, Squadron Commander orders all picket ships to maintain station and await airstrike assets. Estimated time to air support is 90 minutes. Roby glanced at the chart, making a quick calculation. "In 90 minutes, those battleships will be shelling our transports." He turned to his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Patrick Donovan. "We can't wait for air support. We need to delay them now." The radio crackled again. "Commander Roby, this is Commodore Harrington. You are ordered to maintain picket station. Do not engage those battleships. That's a direct order." The bridge fell silent, as all eyes turned to Roby. His lips pressed into a thin line before he responded. "With respect, Commodore, by the time air assets arrive, it will be too late. Those transports are sitting ducks." "That's not your call to make, Commander," came the sharp reply. "The KIDD is a destroyer, not a battleship. You'll be committing suicide against those ships, and for nothing." Roby set the handset down without responding, his decision already made. He turned to his gunnery officer. "Prepare all torpedo tubes. Gun crews to battle stations. We're going to give those battleships something to worry about besides our transports." The gunnery officer stared in disbelief. "Sir, with all due respect, that's the Yamato out there. Our 5-inch guns won't even dent her armor, and to get within torpedo range, we'll have to run straight into their fire." "I'm not planning to sink them," Roby replied, his voice level. "Just delay them long enough for air support to arrive. Sometimes all that matters is disrupting the enemy's plan." As general quarters sounded throughout the ship, sending men racing to battle stations, Executive Officer Donovan approached Roby privately. "Captain, I need to formally state that this action contradicts direct orders." Roby nodded. "So noted, XO. If we survive, I'll face the consequences. If we don't, well, it won't matter much, will it?" The stakes of what was unfolding could not have been higher. The transport area held over 100 ships, many of them crowded with Marines awaiting deployment ashore or wounded men being evacuated. Most had minimal defensive armament and little maneuverability. A battleship like Yamato, with her 9 18-inch guns, could devastate the entire area in minutes. Each massive shell could penetrate up to 20 inches of steel armor and contained nearly 2,000 pounds of high explosive. Against unarmored transport ships, they would be apocalyptic. On board the destroyer USS KIDD, the tension mounted as the gap between the 2,000-ton destroyer and the mammoth Japanese battleships steadily closed. The odds were beyond daunting. They were nearly absurd. A Fletcher-class destroyer like KIDD carried 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedo tubes. While respectable armament against submarines or other destroyers, against a battleship's armor, those 5-inch shells would be little more than annoying pinpricks. The KIDD's best weapons against such massive targets were her torpedoes, but to launch them effectively meant closing to within 5,000 yards, or less, well within the effective range of not just the battleship's main guns, but their secondary batteries as well. Commander Alan Roby knew all this as he studied the tactical plot in the KIDD's Combat Information Center. The mathematics of naval warfare were brutally clear. On paper, what he was attempting was impossible. And yet, the Japanese expect us to follow doctrine, he told his officers gathered around the plotting table. They're counting on us maintaining a safe distance while waiting for air support. That's exactly why we're going to do the opposite. As the distance between the KIDD and the Japanese task force dropped below 15,000 yards, the first salvos from the Yamato's massive guns arced toward them. The aim was still ranging, but close enough that the geysers of water from near messes sent spray across the KIDD's decks. Roby ordered a series of unpredictable zigzag maneuvers, making the destroyer a difficult target while still closing the distance. The KIDD's 5-inch guns began firing at maximum range, not with any hope of damaging the battleships, but to create smoke and confusion. "We don't need to sink them," Roby reminded his gunnery officer. "We just need to disrupt their approach to the transport area. Every minute we delay them is another minute for our aircraft to arrive." On the Yamato's bridge, Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito observed the lone American destroyer with growing concern. According to doctrine, destroyer pickets were supposed to maintain distance and call for reinforcements when confronted by capital ships. This one, however, was behaving erratically, charging forward despite being vastly outgunned. Could it be a diversion? His chief of staff wondered aloud. Perhaps they're trying to draw our attention while their aircraft approach from another vector. Or their captain has lost his mind, another officer suggested. Admiral Ito frowned. Something about this didn't feel right, but he couldn't afford to alter course. The mission was clear: reach the American transport fleet and inflict maximum damage before being destroyed. And yet, this single, aggressive destroyer was creating uncertainty. "Concentrate secondary batteries on that destroyer," he ordered, "but maintain course for the transport area." Aboard the KIDD, the situation was growing increasingly desperate as Japanese shells began finding their range. A 5-inch shell from one of Yamato's secondary batteries struck the destroyer's forecastle, killing 3 men instantly and starting a fire. Damage control teams raced to contain the blaze before it could reach the forward torpedo tubes. In the cramped Combat Information Center, Commander Roby kept his focus on the tactical plot, mentally calculating intercept angles and weapons ranges. Next to him stood Fire Controlman First Class Daniel Carver, a 22-year-old from Iowa who had joined the Navy after his family's farm was foreclosed during the Depression. "Sir," Carver said hesitantly, "I've been running the numbers on the torpedo attack solution. Even if we get within optimal range, the Japanese can easily maneuver to avoid a conventional spread." Roby nodded. "That's why we're not going to use a conventional spread. We're going to fire all tubes in a single salvo, but with staggered depth settings: 4 feet, 8 feet, 12 feet, and 16 feet. Carver's eyes widened. "That's not in the tactical manual, sir." "No, it's not," Roby agreed, "but the Yamato draws nearly 40 feet of water. With staggered depths, we maximize our chance of at least one hit, even if they turn to evade. One torpedo hit won't sink her, but it might slow her enough for our aircraft to finish the job. As the KIDD continued its seemingly suicidal charge, weaving through increasingly accurate enemy fire, the radio room received an urgent transmission from the flagship. "KIDD, this is Admiral Raymond Spruance. Explain your actions immediately." Roby took the handset. "Admiral, KIDD engaging enemy battleships to prevent them reaching transport area. Request immediate air support." There was a moment of silence before Spruance's voice returned. "Airstrike is inbound. ETA 45 minutes. Can you maintain contact that long?" Roby looked at the tactical plot, where the distance to the Japanese ships had shrunk to just 8,000 yards. "We'll do our best, Admiral. KIDD out." He turned to his executive officer. "We've bought some time, but not enough. We need to close to torpedo range now, before they bracket us with their main batteries." "Captain," the XO said quietly, "you realize that at this range, if they hit us with one of those 18-inch shells, there won't be enough left of the KIDD to identify." "I'm aware of the risk," Roby replied. Then, with unexpected candor, "I'm also aware that every man aboard trusted me with their lives when I took command. I don't take that lightly." He paused, looking around at the tense faces of his bridge crew. "My father once told me that a ship is just steel and rivets until you add people. Then it becomes something more. The KIDD isn't just a hull number in a fleet registry. She's 320 men who deserve to go home someday. And those transports we're protecting? There are thousands more." Another near miss sent shudders through the destroyer's hull, reminding everyone of the precarious situation. "All ahead flank," Roby ordered. "Prepare all torpedo tubes for firing. Gun crews continue harassment fire." As the KIDD's engines pushed the vessel to its maximum speed of 38 knots, the destroyer became an even more difficult target, throwing off the carefully calculated Japanese fire control solutions. Simultaneously, Roby ordered a radical maneuver that no Japanese commander could have anticipated. Instead of approaching from the expected angle, the KIDD suddenly turned directly toward the Yamato's bow, presenting the smallest possible target profile while racing straight at the massive battleship. On Yamato's bridge, Admiral Ito watched with growing alarm as the American destroyer closed to less than 6,000 yards, dangerously close to torpedo range. "All batteries concentrate fire on that destroyer," he commanded. "Execute emergency evasive maneuvers." The enormous battleship began a ponderous turn, its massive rudders struggling to alter the momentum of 72,000 tons of steel. But the KIDD, nimble by comparison, continued to close the distance, weaving unpredictably to avoid the intensifying Japanese fire. At 5,200 yards, just over 3 miles, Commander Roby gave the order that would either save the KIDD or doom her. "Fire all torpedoes!" 10 Mark 15 torpedoes, each carrying 440 pounds of explosive in their warheads, erupted from their tubes in rapid succession, their compressed air propulsion systems leaving distinctive white trails in the water as they raced toward the Japanese battleships. "Hard to port," Roby ordered immediately after the last torpedo launched. "All ahead emergency flank. Make smoke." As the KIDD heeled over in a sharp turn, chemical smoke generators began pouring thick artificial fog across the water, obscuring the destroyer from Japanese gunners. Behind the smoke screen, the KIDD's crew held their collective breath, listening to the thunder of Japanese shells passing overhead and counting the seconds until their torpedoes would reach their targets. 20 seconds passed. 30. 40. Then a deep, reverberating boom echoed across the water, followed by another. Through gaps in the smoke screen, the KIDD's lookouts reported an incredible sight. At least 2 torpedoes had struck the Yamato, one near her bow and another amidships. A third had hit the accompanying cruiser, Yahagi. The damage to Yamato wasn't fatal. Her massive compartmentalized hull could absorb multiple torpedo hits and remain operational. But the psychological impact was immediate. The Japanese task force, faced with this unexpectedly aggressive American response, began to hesitate and disperse their formation, their previously steady course toward the transport area now disrupted. "They're turning away?" the KIDD's executive officer reported incredulously. They're actually turning away from the transports. Commander Roby nodded, allowing himself a brief smile. They're reassessing their approach. Every minute they spend maneuvering is another minute they're not shelling our boys on the beaches. The radio crackled with an urgent message. All ships, this is Strike Leader. Avenger and Hellcat squadrons inbound to your position. ETA 12 minutes. Designate targets. Roby grabbed the handset. Strike Leader, this is USS KIDD. Primary target is Yamato, bearing 027 from my position. Range approximately 7,000 yards. She's taken at least 2 torpedo hits, but is still operational. Copy that, KIDD. Good work getting her attention. We'll take it from here. Recommend you withdraw to safe distance. Roby turned to his navigator. Plot course to rejoin the destroyer screen. Best speed. As the KIDD raced away from the Japanese task force, now preoccupied with the approaching American aircraft, a sense of stunned relief spread through the ship. They had accomplished the nearly impossible. A lone destroyer had engaged the largest battleship ever built, and not only survived, but succeeded in disrupting its attack run. The cost, however, had been significant. 11 men were dead, 27 wounded, and the KIDD had sustained damage to her forward gun mount and superstructure. Yet, compared to what might have happened had the Japanese battleships reached the transport area, these losses were miraculously light. What no one aboard the KIDD could have predicted was how their commander's audacious action would reshape naval tactical doctrine in the war's final months and beyond. The engagement that began as an act of calculated disobedience would soon be studied by naval strategists worldwide. The sea churns violently in the destroyer's wake as the USS KIDD races away from the massive Japanese battleships, her smoke generators still pouring thick gray clouds to mask her escape. On the bridge, Commander Alan Roby watches through binoculars as the first American aircraft appear on the horizon. Avenger torpedo bombers and Hellcat fighters from the escort carriers arriving just in time. They're starting their attack runs, he reports to the tense bridge crew. Yamato is their primary target. The distance is too great to see clearly, but flashes of anti-aircraft fire illuminate the sky around the Japanese ships. Within minutes, multiple columns of smoke begin rising from the massive battleship as American bombs and torpedoes find their mark. Radio man Second Class Jeffrey Cole bursts onto the bridge, a message clutched in his hand. "Sir, priority from Admiral Spruance." Roby takes the paper, his expression guarded as he reads the Admiral's message. KIDD engagement with enemy capital ships noted. Maintain current course and rendezvous with Task Group 58.2. Well done. The bridge crew exchanges glances of relief. There is no mention of Roby's disobedience, only acknowledgement of their success. "Sir," asks Lieutenant Commander Donovan quietly, "what do you think will happen when we rejoin the fleet? You directly contravened orders." Roby folds the message deliberately. "I suspect that depends entirely on whether our action is judged by the results or by the rulebook. Either way, I stand by the decision." His words hang in the air as the KIDD steams toward the rendezvous point, leaving behind the burning Japanese ships now under continuous air attack. By evening, word spreads throughout the American fleet of the destroyer that charged battleships, and by the next morning, the Yamato, pride of the Japanese Navy, will lie at the bottom of the sea, struck by nearly 20 bombs and torpedoes from American aircraft. What happened in those critical minutes when the KID engaged the Japanese task force would be analyzed and debated in naval academies for decades to come. The official action report submitted by Commander Roby 48 hours after the engagement laid out the tactical situation in precise, almost clinical detail. It mentioned the imminent threat to the transport area, the limited time available before the Japanese ships would be in firing range, and the decision to engage despite being outnumbered and outgunned. What the report didn't explicitly state, but what became clear to senior commanders reviewing it, was that Roby had made a calculation that defied conventional naval doctrine but ultimately saved thousands of lives. His disruption tactic in using an aggressively maneuvering destroyer to force capital ships to break formation and defend themselves created just enough delay for air assets to arrive. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, personally reviewed the action report. His handwritten note in the margin simply read, "Initiative properly applied. Commend." For the men who served aboard the KIDD during that engagement, the experience was transformative. Many had initially questioned their commander's sanity when he ordered them to charge toward the Japanese battleships. Fire Controlman Daniel Carver later recalled, "When the captain gave the order to make a torpedo run on Yamato, I thought he'd lost his mind. This wasn't some Japanese destroyer. This was the biggest battleship ever built." But then I saw how calm he was, how methodically he approached it, and I realized he had a plan that just wasn't in any tactical manual I'd ever seen. Seaman Thomas Whitfield, who served as a loader on one of the KIDD's 5-inch guns, described the surreal nature of the engagement. "We were firing our hearts out, even though we knew our shells couldn't penetrate their armor. It felt like throwing pebbles at a tank. But the captain had told us our job wasn't to sink them, just to distract them. Every shell we fired meant another Japanese gunner was focusing on us instead of getting accurate fire on the transports." The most telling testimony came from Lieutenant Robert Jackson, the KIDD's torpedo officer. "When Commander Roby ordered the staggered depth settings for our torpedoes, I nearly objected. It violated every procedure we'd been taught. But in that moment, I realized he was adapting to the specific situation rather than blindly following doctrine. That's when I understood the difference between leadership and merely following a manual." The impact of the KIDD's action extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Within weeks, the engagement was being discussed in briefings throughout the Pacific Fleet. Commander Arleigh Burke, already famous for his aggressive destroyer tactics, incorporated elements of Roby's approach into what would later be known as the Little Beavers destroyer squadron tactics. Perhaps the most significant endorsement came from Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of the Fast Carrier Task Force, who issued a tactical bulletin titled "Aggressive Small Ship Actions Against Capital Ships" that explicitly referenced the KIDD's engagement with Yamato. The bulletin noted, "While conventional doctrine dictates that destroyers avoid direct engagement with battleships, recent actions have demonstrated that under specific circumstances, aggressive destroyer tactics can effectively disrupt enemy operations, particularly when coordinated with air assets." For Commander Alan Roby personally, the aftermath of the action brought mixed consequences. 3 weeks after the engagement, he was summoned to Admiral Spruance's flagship for what he assumed would be a formal reprimand for disobeying direct orders. Instead, Spruance asked a single question: "Would you make the same decision again, Commander?" Without hesitation, Roby replied, "Yes, sir. Given the same circumstances, I would." Spruance nodded. "That's what I thought you'd say. Your action saved a lot of lives, Roby. But it also set a precedent that could be dangerous if misapplied. Not every junior officer has your tactical judgment." The meeting ended without a formal reprimand, but also without the commendation that many thought Roby deserved. It was a nuanced response that acknowledged both the success of his action and the potential problems of encouraging officers to disregard the chain of command. For the remainder of the Okinawa campaign, the USS KIDD continued to serve with distinction, primarily in the radar picket role that became increasingly dangerous as Japanese kamikaze attacks intensified. The ship suffered additional damage from a near miss by a kamikaze on May 11, 1945, but remained operational until the end of the campaign. When the war ended with Japan's surrender in August 1945, the KIDD was undergoing repairs in San Diego. Commander Roby received orders transferring him to the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, a move that many interpreted as both a recognition of his tactical innovation and a way to keep him away from operational command, where his unorthodox approaches might influence younger officers. At the War College, Roby was tasked with developing new tactical doctrines for destroyer operations, incorporating lessons from the Pacific War. His paper, Asymmetric Engagement Tactics for Small Combatants, became required reading for a generation of naval officers. Without explicitly mentioning his own actions aboard the KIDD, the paper laid out principles for situations where conventional doctrine might need to be reconsidered in favor of adaptive, situation-specific tactics. As for the men who served aboard the KIDD during that fateful engagement, their experiences shaped their lives in profound ways. Many continued naval careers, carrying with them the lessons learned under Roby's command. Others returned to civilian life, but maintained connections through the USS KIDD Veterans Association, which held its first reunion in 1952. At that first reunion, held at a modest hotel in Chicago, 27 former crew members gathered to share memories and honor their fallen shipmates. Commander Roby, by then promoted to captain and serving at the Pentagon, made a point of attending. According to those present, he spent most of the evening listening rather than speaking, hearing how the experience had affected each man. When finally called upon to say a few words, Roby's remarks were characteristically brief. What we did that day wasn't extraordinary. We simply did what the situation demanded, rather than what the rule book prescribed. If there's a lesson in that, it's that sometimes the right action isn't the one you've been trained to take, but the one that serves the greater purpose. For Daniel Carver, the fire controlman who had questioned the unorthodox torpedo settings, the reunion brought a chance to finally ask his former commander about that decision. "Sir," he asked, "did you really believe those torpedoes would work with the staggered depth settings? Or was it just the best bad option available?" Roby smiled. "Honestly, both. The mathematics suggested it might work, but conventional wisdom said it wouldn't. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts over the established doctrine." Thomas Whitfield, who had left the Navy to become a high school physics teacher in Pennsylvania, approached Roby with a different question. "Captain, I've told my students about what happened that day, about how one ship changed the course of a battle. Some of them don't believe it's possible. What should I tell them?" "Tell them," Roby replied, "that history is full of moments where the actions of a few, or even just one, altered the course of events, not because they were superhuman, but because they were willing to act when others weren't." The USS KIDD herself survived the war and was decommissioned in 1946. Placed in the reserve fleet, she would be recommissioned during the Korean War, serving from 1951 to 1964, before being decommissioned again. Today she serves as a memorial and museum ship in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, one of only 4 Fletcher-class destroyers preserved in the United States. Visitors to the KIDD can walk her decks, stand on the same bridge where Commander Roby made his fateful decision, and examine exhibits detailing her service, including the engagement with Yamato. A special display case contains the original action report, alongside personal items donated by crew members who served that day. Perhaps the most telling artifact is a simple bronze plaque installed during a 1987 ceremony attended by aging veterans of the ship. It bears a quote attributed to Admiral Chester Nimitz. "Uncommon valor was a common virtue." Beneath it, in smaller letters, is added, "Sometimes uncommon judgment is equally valuable." The legacy of the KIDD's action extends beyond memorials and museums, however. In modern naval doctrine, the concept of asymmetric engagement, smaller vessels using unconventional tactics against larger, more powerful opponents, draws directly from lessons learned during that April morning in 1945. Naval officers studying at Annapolis and other maritime academies around the world still analyze the KIDD-Yamato engagement as a case study in tactical innovation under extreme circumstances. The lesson is not that orders should be disregarded, but rather that doctrine must be applied with judgment, adaptability, and a clear understanding of the mission's ultimate purpose. In the decades following World War II, as naval warfare evolved with new technologies and threats, the principles demonstrated by Commander Roby aboard the KIDD continued to influence tactical thinking. During the Cold War, American destroyer captains facing the numerically superior Soviet Navy were taught to consider disruptive engagement tactics rather than strictly defensive postures. For Alan Roby himself, the years after the war brought a distinguished but not meteoric career. He retired from the Navy in 1961 with the rank of Rear Admiral, having served primarily in educational and doctrine development roles rather than operational commands. His reputation within the service remained that of a brilliant but unconventional thinker, respected but viewed with a certain wariness by more traditional officers. In his retirement, Roby rarely spoke publicly about the KIDD's engagement with Yamato, preferring to let official histories tell the story. When pressed by historians or journalists, he typically deflected attention to the crew, emphasizing that their skill and courage had made the action possible. Only in private correspondence with former shipmates did he reveal more personal reflections. In a letter to Executive Officer Donovan from 1972, discovered among Donovan's papers after his death, Roby wrote, "What stays with me isn't the decision itself, but the moments immediately after, watching those young men execute orders they must have thought were insane, trusting me with their lives. That trust remains both the heaviest burden and greatest honor I've ever carried." Roby passed away in 1983 at his home in Annapolis, Maryland. His obituary in the Naval Institute proceedings mentioned his wartime service and later contributions to naval doctrine, but made only brief reference to the KIDD's engagement with Yamato. The fullest recognition came posthumously when in 1995, the Naval War College established the annual Roby Award for Tactical Innovation, presented to the officer whose paper best demonstrates creative approaches to maritime challenges that transcend established doctrine. At the ceremony establishing the award, Admiral Jeremy Borda, then Chief of Naval Operations, observed, "The greatness of our naval service lies not just in following traditions, but in knowing when. Tradition must yield to necessity." It was as if, even in death, the Navy remained somewhat ambivalent about celebrating an action that succeeded by defying conventional wisdom and direct orders. Commander Roby's action aboard the KIDD reminds us that naval warfare is ultimately about human judgment, not just firepower or technology. Today, few outside naval circles remember the name Alan Roby or recognize how a single decision by one destroyer commander influenced modern maritime doctrine. Yet every time a smaller vessel employs unconventional tactics against a more powerful opponent, from patrol boats using sophisticated maneuvers against larger ships to the concept of distributed lethality in current naval strategy, they are drawing upon lessons first demonstrated during those tense minutes off Okinawa. The world of naval warfare has changed dramatically since 1945. Missiles have replaced torpedoes as the primary ship-killing weapons. Aircraft carriers, not battleships, dominate maritime strategy. Autonomous systems and network-centric warfare have transformed how fleets operate. Yet beneath these technological changes, the fundamental principle illustrated by the KIDD's engagement remains constant. Adaptability and initiative can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Perhaps the most lasting testament to Commander Roby's legacy comes not from official histories or naval doctrine, but from the men who served under him. At the final reunion of USS KIDD veterans in 2012, only 7 former crew members were able to attend, all in their 90s. Among them was Seaman Thomas Whitfield, by then 91 years old. When asked by a young naval officer what lesson he had carried from his service aboard the KIDD, Whitfield reflected for a moment before answering, "I learned that sometimes the book answer isn't the right answer." Commander Roby taught us that rules exist for good reasons, but thinking exists for better ones. Whitfield's words capture the essential paradox of the KIDD's action. It succeeded by violating established procedures, yet ultimately served the highest purpose of those procedures, protecting American lives and advancing the mission. It's a lesson that resonates far beyond naval warfare, speaking to the eternal tension between discipline and initiative, between following established wisdom and forging new paths when circumstances demand it. As we reflect on this nearly forgotten episode from the closing months of World War II, we might ask ourselves, would you have made the same decision as Commander Roby? Faced with direct orders to avoid engagement, would you have recognized the moment when those orders needed to be set aside for a higher purpose? Would you have had the courage to act on that recognition, knowing that failure would mean not just personal consequences but the lives of your crew? These questions have no easy answers. They speak to the complex reality of leadership under extreme pressure, the reality faced not just by naval officers, but by anyone in positions of responsibility during crisis. Perhaps that's why the story of the USS KIDD and her engagement with Yamato continues to fascinate naval strategists and historians decades later. It reminds us that behind the technical aspects of warfare, the weapons, the tactics, the doctrines, lie human decisions made in moments of uncertainty and danger. The next time you hear someone speak of thinking outside the box or disruptive innovation, remember the story of a single American destroyer charging Japanese battleships on an April morning in 1945. Remember how one commander's willingness to transcend conventional thinking saved countless lives and influenced military doctrine for generations. And if you ever find yourself in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, consider visiting the USS KIDD at her permanent berth on the Mississippi River. Walk her decks, stand on her bridge, and imagine that moment when Commander Alan Roby gave the order that defied conventional wisdom but served the highest purpose of his mission. In doing so, you'll be touching a largely forgotten piece of history that continues to shape how navies around the world think about warfare, leadership, and the crucial role of human judgment in an increasingly technological battlefield. Comment below and share this story so others remember what courage and unconventional thinking really mean when the stakes couldn't be higher.